Hello and welcome to another episode of the Property Voice podcast. My name is Richard Brown, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you join me again on the show today. Well, if you found the show notes or if you found the YouTube channel, you can obviously see that I'm delivering this by video, so it's unscripted. I'm just trying video now, so hopefully you enjoy that. If you're just listening by audio, ignore that comment. It's just irrelevant, obviously. So what I thought I'd do today is cover a couple of points which relate to birds, essentially. So bluebirds and black swans is really what I want to talk about. And I also want to come back and share something of an update from the latest crop of the Property Voice apprentices on the apprentice program, which has recently kicked off. So let's just sort of go into the theme, if you like, which is all about bluebirds and black swans. So first of all, a bit of a definition. So a bluebird is it's a rare event, it's something unusual, but it's a good thing that happens to us, and obviously we'll take it when it comes. We take it when it comes, but there's a couple of lessons, I guess, that come out of that. Come back to that in a minute. And then a black swan is also something of an unexpected event. A black swan event is something that was unforeseen and actually is pretty negative usually as well. So we've got two sides of the same coin in effect. We both use bird idioms or analogies to describe, so the bluebird or the black swan. So let me just illustrate with a couple of examples. So in terms of bluebirds, a couple of bluebird deals. So these are great deals that come along from time to time. So there's a couple I just want to mention. One was a few years ago. Essentially, I was offered a property which has a value of about £190,000, and I was offered this for about £142,000. It didn't need a lot of work doing, actually. Usually you find, there's quite a lot of work that you need to be done and it needs to get done, and maybe you still make a profit, but it's nothing like that 50 grand, more or less, that I'm talking about there. So in this particular case, I only needed to do a light redecoration and some minor repairs. I think it cost me about £4,000, that sort of order, to get the property back up to standard. And in fact, I duly refinanced out onto a buy-to-let mortgage, was keeping this property, was intended to. And I got the valuation, I think it was either 190 or 195,000 in the end. So it was almost fully recycling my cash. There was some fees involved, some holding costs, some financing charges. So I think pretty much left 10,000 in that deal, and had a very good cash flow. And so around about 10,000 for a property worth 190, 195,000. From memory, the cash flow was certainly about 250, maybe slightly more now actually. So very decent returning investment. A bluebird, because it doesn't always go that way. That's the point. So yes, you can sometimes get opportunities like that, but often you need to spend a bit more to get the uplift in valuation. Sometimes you just don't get the uplift recognised by a valuer. So even if you did have one like I've just described, perhaps in 6 months' time, you can't really justify uplifting the value sufficiently in a valuer's eyes. So it doesn't necessarily change the fact that the property is maybe worth 190 or 195,000. It just means you've got to convince a valuer that he can see that you spent, or I say assume he or she can assume that you spent the money to uplift the value, which he can convince the bank to lend you against, and therefore you can pull out a large chunk of your cash. So that's one thing. The second example was another one. I was going to flip this property. I did a refurb on it, but I was planning to buy and sell it. Did a fairly substantial refurb, about 25,000 I spent on it. I paid about 75,000 for this particular property up in Yorkshire, and I put it on the market for 125, which is probably the comparables around about 120, 122. I put it on at 125, perhaps thinking I might need to take an offer. But it's the best property in the area, no doubt about it. Spend a lot of money, and it was by far the best property in the area. Lo and behold, first time buyer came along, offered the asking price, and I duly accepted, of course. Only for their valuer, of course, acting on behalf of their lender, to downvalue it to about 115,000, which was a bit naughty. Should have been probably downvalued to about 120, 122. But there we go. And the point there is, we just had a difference of opinion, essentially. I could substantiate a value in the region of 120 to 125,000, depending on whether you pay a premium for a brand spanking new refurb property. And the valuer could probably argue there was some lesser quality, in fact they did, there's some lesser quality properties around, perhaps it could pull it down to the 115,000. Difference of opinion, you win some, you lose some. What I did in the end in that particular case with that flip property is I just decided to keep it. So I put a tenant in, I refinanced it myself. I didn't get the best valuation myself either, because there weren't enough substantiated comps for valuers to hang the hat on. That's the point. But I'll live to fight another day on that one. So I've got decent equity, decent cash flow, and I know I've got a decent asset because I spent a lot of money doing that property up. So perhaps in a couple of years I'll look at it again and we'll decide what we do at that point in time. But the first deal in particular was a Bluebird. In fact, the second deal would have been a relative Bluebird as well. I had the first-time buyer been able to get their mortgage in place. Would have made us a few extra quid, I suppose, on the deal. But here's the thing about Bluebirds. They're called Bluebirds because they don't happen every day. In fact, the norm is you need to spend more money on the property or you don't get the valuation. So you shouldn't expect them, is my point. And in fact, you should build in plans that you don't always get these Bluebird properties. That's from our point of view as investors. But there's a flip side as well, because sometimes people are offering us services, perhaps deal sources, for example, and maybe they quote the Bluebirds. The deals that always go swimmingly well with the great returns and, no hassle, yada, yada, yada. So don't always believe, particularly if somebody's got a vested interest in showing you their fantastic deals, that they are always what they seem to be. In fact, I had somebody the other day write to me saying that he was going to you work with a deal sourcer in a part of the country, and they're getting up to 100% return on investment on BRR deals. So the implication being they're pretty much recycling all of their money. And I said, well, why would anybody give you a deal where they get, effectively all your money back? Why don't they just do it themselves? I certainly wouldn't be giving that deal away. I'd be doing it myself. So there's a bit of a question mark there, isn't there? So yeah, I can show an example where I've done a great deal, but does it actually mean I'm going to give it away to someone else? Not necessarily. So it's kind of take the Bluebirds when they come, but don't necessarily believe that they're going to happen all of the time. And especially if you hear what sounds like too good to be true information from people presenting it to you, maybe it is a bit too good to be true. So that's the Bluebird. Then we got the Black Swan. So the Black Swan event is the so-called Black Swan event is an unforeseen event that affects us, and no one could see it coming. An example is a global financial crisis. A Black Swan event came out of nowhere. Nobody could see the banking crisis happening, could they? Well, actually, yes, they could. In fact, there's a book called The Black Swan. I think it's called The Black Swan Event. But basically, which talks about these apparently unforeseen circumstances happen repeatedly. Perhaps there's different actual reasons or triggers that cause them. And if you study any cycles, whether it's economic cycle, property cycle, with alarming regularity, these Black Swan events seem to happen roughly every 15 to 20 years. But nobody saw it coming, and it was always different this time. But they always come. So that's my biggest takeaway, is we don't necessarily know the exact triggers of these so-called Black Swan events, but we can actually predict with a degree of confidence that these sorts of unforeseen events will happen from time to time. And what does it mean? It means that it can have an impact on our business, of course. We can go into recession. We can have property price crashes. All sorts of things can happen. Credit crunches can affect our business. Well, we need to be prepared for those. Is really what I'm talking about. So, as far as possible, we should go in with due diligence, with protection. So don't take everything out the deal. Leave some money on the table. Do have contingency plans in place. Don't be overly greedy. Don't have all your eggs in one basket. And do have a means of escape potentially in the case that should happen. I've talked about it other times on the podcast. There's other resources. By all means, there's the House of Cards, for example, methodology that you can adopt, which can predict the safety of your portfolio through, say, recessionary times, if I can say it. So write in if you want more information on that, or if you want to talk about economic cycles or bubbles or those sorts of Black Swan events, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. But here's the nub. Don't let these Black Swan events be what take you out. And I'm going to just share something very, very personal to me at the moment. I've had a so-called personal Black Swan event recently. I'm literally in the midst. I'm going to tell the full story another time, but I'm in the midst of actually a bit of crisis management on a couple of projects where they perhaps haven't been managed. I've allocated the management to a third party, and they perhaps haven't been managed in the right way. And things have started to accumulate, and started to see things going off the rails a bit. So I had to jump in pretty quickly, swiftly, and with a heavy hand to make sure these projects come back on track. And the long and short of it is, and I'll be very honest with you, is I overtrusted to some extent that things were going well with this particular individual who's managing some projects for me. And so some of the checks and balances that I would always recommend, some doing your due diligence, having independent eyes and ears and those sorts of things, I kind of let loose a little bit because of the relationship that evolved over a period of years, actually, and things have been going well, but, you know, and then just letting the reins go a little bit, which is on me. And then, unfortunately, the other party kind of started to, you know, maybe there's things going on in their life, I don't know, but started to see things slip a bit. So that's kind of a personal Black Swan event, and really I'm kicking myself because really what I should have done is I should have just maintained the rhythm of having the checks and just having a, you know, my own trusted pair of eyes and ears to check on those things. So yeah, I'm paying a bit of a price at the moment, in all honesty, but it's going to be recovered. But here's my point: the reason it's going to be recovered is I have, you know, contingencies in place. So I have assets that don't have any liability on. I have additional investments that I can call upon in these sorts of times. I have alternative income streams so I can get myself through difficult moments. There's probably a bunch of things I've forgotten there, but you know, that one particular event hopefully shouldn't be too detrimental to my position because I protected the downside in a number of different ways. Now, what I should have done, of course, is protected the downside, particularly in the projects, and had a bit more checks and balances taking place. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, I was a little bit lax, not for long, but for enough for it to go a little bit awry. But the good news is that I've got alternative protections that I can call upon, and in fact I've got a method of recourse as well, which I'm actively pursuing. So the Black Swan events, don't get caught out. In other words, whether it's a personalised one like I just told you, or it's more of a kind of an industry one, if you like, or an economic one, they happen, and they happen regularly. So just protect the downside risk, put the due diligence steps in place. So there we go. The Bluebirds and the Black Swans, they're both apparently rare, so don't always believe the good times, don't always believe the bad times, but be prepared for both. But don't assume that that is constant and it's the way it is at every single moment, I guess, is the key takeaway from this particular message. So that was that. I just wanted to share that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the TPV apprentices. You're going to hear in a minute a recording. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this with a video, so we'll figure it out later on. You're going to hear a recording. Got 4 very different individuals who have joined what is now the 3rd Property Voice Apprentice Program. So we'll have done a full year by the time these guys finish in December. So we have Aldo, we have Terry, we have Matthew, and we have Antoine. And apart from a mix of nationalities, we've also got people based in different countries. Again, we had people in the last program who were based in different countries. And this time we've got different nationalities as well. We've got people with different goals, people who perhaps are looking at long-term investment strategies or passive income streams. And we've got people looking for income in the here and now and need to do something to generate funds. So a very broad base of that. So I'm going to enjoy sharing with you over you know, just periodically, probably every month or so, over the course of the program, their progress and their learnings, if you like. You're going to hear a bit in their own words in a second. But you know, I guess the thing is, I just wanted to share with you, hopefully this is interesting for you to get fly on the wall insights from the apprentices. Just let me know what you think about it. Equally, if you're thinking about potentially maybe this apprentice program could be something interesting for you to go through yourself at a later stage. I don't really advertise it. I've already got a couple of people lined up for the next program, which will start early next year. I'm only taking 4 people on with an intake, and I'm only doing 3 intakes a year. So, but it's a very intensive and immersive process, particularly from my point of view. But I really get a buzz out of it, just seeing turnaround and people's eyes light up with a sense of belief, I guess, once they see that they can actually realise their goals and their dreams and their plans. So yeah, get in touch if you want to hear more about that. I'll happily share it with you. I think in terms of an update this week, that's probably all I wanted to share. As you can see, I'm experimenting with the video model, so hopefully if you see this on YouTube, drop a comment in or something. I need to figure out how to respond to comments or get alerted to them, but so I'm not ignoring you if you've already commented, I haven't replied. Just let me know what you think. But you know, that was it really. I guess the show notes of what there will be, because there's not going to be necessarily a full transcription of the show, but the show notes are going to be over at the website, propertyvoice.net. If you want to talk to me about anything from today's show, or indeed about property investing and developing generally, you know, you can reach me, podcast@thepropertyvoice.net. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. So I'm just remembering my outro sort of script here. Meanwhile, I guess all that remains to be said is thank you very much for listening or indeed watching this week on the Property Voice podcast. And until next time on the Property Voice podcast, it's ciao ciao.